So, Renato, was it a bad idea for Jack Smith to charge Donald Trump in the first place?
It's complicated. I'm Renato Mariotti. I'm a former federal prosecutor, a practicing lawyer, and a legal analyst.
And I'm Asha Rangappa. I teach national security law at Yale University. I'm a former FBI special agent, and I'm a legal contributor for ABC News.
And I'm Ken White. I'm thrilled to be a guest today, and I'm a former federal prosecutor, a criminal defense attorney, and practicing attorney, and podcaster.
And we're here to help you understand topics that can't be boiled down into a soundbite or a skeet. And that's a good starting point here, because the reason that we have Ken on our episode today for this episode is that Asha and I have, like many millions of people, moved to Blue Sky, where tweets are called skeets, and we saw a really compelling skeet from Ken.
Hi, Ken.
Hi, Asha. Hi, Renato. How are you?
Good. We're happy to have you on.
Yeah,
Happy
you're
to
like a
be
blast
here.
of the past.
Yeah, that's true. We've
Because
talked before.
yes, well, on
When did we have him on?
Renato and I were on a podcast years ago, I think somewhere in the middle of the series of cases against now President-elect again, Donald Trump. And the worm has turned, and now we're talking about many of the same cases but from a different direction.
Yeah, and I feel like you and I were on a podcast too about something at some
We
point.
were. I think it might have been during the Mueller investigation.
Yes, yeah.
I
Back in season 1.
Right.
I still remember on my old podcast on Topic having Ken as a guest, and this was right when the same night that all the plea agreements dropped for Michael Cohen, when Michael Cohen had been lying to Congress and this and that, and people were like, "Wow, Trump's finally going down." And me and Ken were like, "Yeah, no, we don't think so." And everyone was shocked, and it created a whole uproar on Twitter. All my followers are upset. And obviously, as it turns out, Asha, I've been told so many times by so many people in real life and online that I am a pie in the sky optimist after our last episode, and
I
that
know.
Asha
I
is
saw
the
that.
realist. Yes.
I saw that. Well, yeah. I mean, all of that was just a complete lifetime ago, and our world is very different now. And I think that's why we brought you on, Ken, because what was the argument that you made on Blue Sky?
Well, I was talking about the latest episode of Serious Trouble, which is the podcast I do with Josh Barrow. And Josh and I have an argument about whether or not it was a good idea for Jack Smith and the Department of Justice to go after Donald Trump if the result was this, in my view, terrible Supreme Court decision that gives presidents a level of criminal immunity that kind of resembles that you would expect of a king. And if the end result is all those things fail and he was merely emboldened as all these criminal cases fall away. Josh was on the more skeptical side, thinking it was not a good idea. I was maybe having a bit of that optimist spirit that Renato does, more on the side that sometimes you have to take the shot. Sometimes you have to try even if you fail.
It's interesting because I think part of it depends on the benefit of hindsight, right?
Yes.
Right. So, in other words, at the time, there was a point in time, Ken, and this is a big deal for me. For the first time ever, I was like, "Wow, Trump very well may actually have a trial before the election," and that was when Judge Chutkan made it clear that she was going to clear the decks and have this trial as soon as possible, and so on. I thought, okay, this is getting very real. And this may actually happen before the election, and there may actually be a criminal trial of Donald Trump, and a sentencing potentially. I was, obviously, now we know the result, which is that all failed and potentially helped him in a presidential run. It certainly didn't hurt him. And now, as you point out, we have a Supreme Court decision that I think is probably the scariest thing out there when we're thinking about a second Trump presidency.
Absolutely. It's a license to use power in a way that we would see as criminal in an environment when there's functionally no chance that the United States Senate is going to hold him to task. And now where he learns that there's no risk that criminal authorities will hold him to task.
So I want to think about this question. And I mean, it's a counterfactual. So we don't know how this would have turned out if Jack Smith hadn't pursued this. But I want to rewind back to season 1, actually, or maybe season 2. When did Amy Coney Barrett get appointed?
At the last appointment of the Trump administration, I believe.
Yeah,
within 5 weeks.
Right. It was right at the tail end, right? So, I mean, I think it's hard. I think to look at whether this opinion from the court was inevitable, I do think it's worth asking whether charges should have been brought in a different context at an earlier time, and whether it might have been more tempered. I mean, it may have still come out this way, but like, I have to wonder, had, if there had been a question that could have come up, I guess anytime after Biden became president, it still would have been the same composition, or almost the same composition as this court. But I wonder, for example, if the obstruction of justice issue could have been pushed all the way to the top back at the time when I think there was still a consensus during the Mueller investigation that the president could be held accountable for something. And there was this very academic debate about, can the president obstruct justice because of all of these theoretical concerns about Article 2, et cetera, et cetera. I wonder if something that had pushed the question about immunity in that context, or even just the contours of presidential power in that context, if you might have gotten something more cabined, both because of the time that it was brought up, the composition of the court at that time, than one that came after the insurrection and, almost after a president had really gone off the rails and the court was 6-3 and had this clear majority, where Chief Justice Roberts had come under all this criticism for losing control of the court. And, I think there's been some speculation on this being a way for him to cobble back this conservative majority. And then also almost a no way out situation for the court of, if they really want an outcome determinative thing where they allow Trump to still be on the ballot or win, which I think was partly what was going on, they had to come up with something so expansive that it literally wouldn't benefit any other normal person running for president.
Sure. And I know it's a very reply guy thing to do, to argue with a counterfactual, but it would have to be, it would have had to have been something from the Mueller investigation.
Yeah.
It would have had to have been Robert Mueller being more aggressive and recommending obstruction of justice, which I think was a colorable charge at that time, and getting something to start under Bill Barr as Attorney General, which I don't think is historically realistic. But even if you've got prosecutors starting that investigation on day one of the Biden administration, and they get to the indictments maybe year and a half quicker, I don't know if that changes the result before the Supreme Court, because I think there are a lot of factors built in here, and some of them are the sort of overt wave of Trumpism, but some of them also are some of these buried themes from conservatism that have been there for a long time. The unitary executive concept, which is very much a G.W. Bush era concept and a Federalist Society concept from way back when, all contributing to this outcome.
It's interesting, Ken, as I think about it, when I agree with you, by the way, about nothing happening during the Trump presidency. And I also think Barrett was actually not the problem in the immunity decision.
No, that's true. That's true.
Her opinion was what I thought we were going to get, and we didn't get that.
Barrett's tone is very much, wait here. I'm just regular crazy. I'm not this super crazy you guys are going.
Yeah.
But I guess if I'm looking backwards and I'm faulting how this unfolded, what I guess I always thought should have happened, Ken, was, and I mentioned this to Asha in the last episode, was that on day one of a Biden administration, Biden should have said, I'm going to appoint a special counsel to look at all these things that happened in the last administration, some of which are not criminal, just to basically tell the public that, and look at what happened, and maybe appoint some commission that also looks at How do we reform government so that we don't have, for example, a president interfering in the sentencings of his friends, or we don't have children separated from their parents, or we potentially have some recourse for a Hatch Act violation or some mechanism for that, or whatever the various concerns that people had coming out of the Trump era, where we reckon with it and say, this is a problem. How do we change things going forward? And this would be before McCarthy went down to Mar-a-Lago and had his thumbs up photo and all of that, and kind of captured that moment. And I feel like that was the opportunity.
I think that's right. And just to kind of go back to the moment that I do think impacts the court more precisely, is there was a window where it seemed inconceivable that Trump could be the nominee again. And I think a court deciding in that context is a very different one, a very different mindset than one where he has already received the nomination and we're barreling towards an election. I just think that those two moments in time are different. And to your point, Renato, also signaling from the get-go that this person, as well as all these other things that have happened, are under investigation, puts him, under a microscope in a way that giving him a pass for almost 2 years did not. Like or how did I say that? Yeah, it doesn't give him a pass in the way that not looking at it for 2 years did.
The other problem I see here is a lot of the criticism of Merrick Garland and a lot of the criticisms of this situation kind of run along the lines of, they could have charged this really quickly. They could have charged this on day one of the Biden administration. Why did they do it the traditional federal prosecutor way that we're all familiar with, of, meticulously building the web to the grand jury and subpoenas and all that sort of thing? And to me, that's kind of magical thinking. It's saying, why didn't federal prosecutors act the way that federal prosecutors never act, and do it fast and without meticulous preparation? Why didn't federal prosecutors squander their competitive advantage of a slow and steady investigation? I think that what some people are talking about, this fire from the hip indictment very early in the Biden administration, before that meticulous buildup, would have resulted in a more fragile case and made it even more likely the court would have ruled the way it did, because the case wouldn't have had the same level of legitimacy. So in other words, I don't think squandering the Fed's competitive advantage in a thorough, slow investigation would have been a good idea. So could we have wound up with an indictment a year sooner if he had appointed, if Merrick Garland had appointed Jack Smith a year earlier? Absolutely. But I don't think you could have gotten this thing where, within months of the beginning of the Biden administration, you had any charges that would be worthwhile.
I think that's true, but I do think, by all accounts, it does seem that they were not looking at him until after the January 6th commission. That Merrick Garland's approach was the mob approach, that we're going to go, or, whatever conspiracy approach, we're going to start at the bottom and work our way up the top. And I remember around the time where this was put forth, our colleague Andrew Weissman said, this is not a bottom up type of thing. This is a hub and spoke. And
Right.
as a result, you're actually, you're missing that this is that there's a whole central thing that's affecting all of these other things. And I think you're right. They couldn't have filed an indictment immediately, but it's shocking to me that there was not. I mean, we saw in front of our faces probable cause that a crime was committed.
Right. So I think you're right that it was never a good argument if it was the argument that we first have to prosecute all the people who were wandering around the Capitol with headdresses and sitting at Nancy Pelosi's desk and stuff. Michael, I'm not sure that's what made anyone hesitate. I don't really think that the Justice Department, they know what they're doing. They didn't see prosecuting those people as steps towards prosecuting Trump. My perception is more that Merrick Garland, as an institutionalist and cautious, was looking for political cover and institutional legitimacy cover, where he could say, the United States Congress has made these findings, and that's a legitimate basis for me to start this investigation that doesn't just look like the new attorney general going after the last president.
Yeah, I think that, I'd say it's also worth remembering there's two different investigations here. On the Mar-a-Lago side, I actually think that the very careful approach that they took generated the evidence that it did. I mean, I think if they
Right.
stormed into Mar-a-Lago without sending letters and subpoenas and all of that, it would have made their life much harder in the Mar-a-Lago side. And I actually think that was the strongest case they had by a country mile. I think on the January 6th case, I do think there was a real question of like, is this something that we should be prosecuting because it's such an unprecedented moment in U.S. history and blah, blah, blah. I think that goes to, I mean, you made the point, Ken, you characterized it one way. I'll describe it a different way. I think there is this element in the Biden administration, a baked in assumption that if we just return to how things were before, that we can kind of forget what happened during those 4 years, as opposed to like, let's say a Truth and Reconciliation Commission approach where we're like, okay, we have to grapple with it all. And I think that was sort of underlying that on January 6th.
Yeah, I was just going to chime into Renato and say, I think that is right, that was, I mean, I think it's just a huge dereliction of duty and a complete misunderstanding of where we were. So I use the analogy of a minivan with bad alignment, and it's like, or a minivan that has bad alignment, but it's like weaving all over the place. And Merrick Garland comes in and is like, okay, we just need to steady the wheel. Except if you steady the wheel, it's still veering off. Like you literally have to take it in and repair the axles and get it back on track. And I think that's the part that he completely missed. And that's why we're now in the woods.
I think that's right. And I just want to expand on Renato's point a little bit about why the documents case, the classified documents case was so strong, because a lot of it was typical DOJ strategy where they start investigation and people react in ways that are good evidence of bad intent. So most of the evidence of Trump's consciousness of wrongdoing and of the other people's consciousness came from the way they reacted to that methodical investigation. And that's exactly what DOJ loves to do. And Asha, you were an FBI agent. I'm sure you were taught how you go ask the questions to rattle their cage and see what they do. And that helps prove up what they did before. So that was something that I think is a good observation. Let me tell you what really seriously bothers me about this and about that question of whether it was worth it in the first place. Something I get a lot of out of this from some circles is, what's the point of due process? What's the point of the First Amendment? If this idea that the way to counter speech is with other speech, that failed here. So why are you still trying to sell me that? If the approach that we have to give Donald Trump, this elaborate due process of law, produce this result, then what's the point of it? I think there's this sort of a doom and gloomism, at least on the Democratic side, where a lot of people are willing, just as they're willing to say, what was even the point of this? What is the point of these basic American values if they present this result? And that's kind of alarming because those values only really survive to the extent that there's some sort of delicate social consensus supporting them.
I just want to push back on the Mar-a-Lago thing.
Okay.
I don't think they had, and I don't think they were building an investigation to prosecute him from the beginning. I think they just wanted the documents back because they understood that these really threatened national security. Honestly, I think if they were non-classified documents, I don't even know if they would have pushed as hard as they did. I think that these had major national security implications, and I think they sat and negotiated. And if Trump had given it back, even after non-compliance for a little while, I frankly think they wouldn't have gone down that road. So even there, they were handling it with kid gloves. And it was only when he refused to hand it back and they knew that these were not secure and that they're literally spies crawling all over Mar-a-Lago. They've caught them there. So I think they had to, and the envelope was pushed in that case.
I agree with everything you said. I don't disagree with a word you said. I guess my view is just that when you have the former president of the United States, it can be, if you don't take all these steps, a difficult criminal case to make. I agree that their reasoning for how they did it was what you said. They wanted to just diffuse the situation and get the documents back. But by doing so, they made such an airtight criminal case.
No doubt.
So where we might disagree is just at what point they started thinking, we better cross our T's and dot our I's here because it could go criminal. At what point did they start to have, let's draw out the bad behavior as part of the approach? And maybe we disagree about what point in the timeline that was.
Yeah, and I think that point was probably after they learned that he still had documents even after saying that he had complied with their subpoena.
Okay, now I want to kind of inject a slightly different element to this. There have been a number of state court criminal matters, not just the two that obviously we've talked a lot about, at least on our podcast, the Bragg matter in Manhattan and the Fulton County matter, but there are other state prosecutions in Arizona. There's one that's still ongoing. There was one in Michigan, and so on. I think that one thing that I'll stake, I don't know if everyone agrees with this. I think that prosecution of kind of random Republican Party bozos in the local level, I actually think is absolutely a good thing, because that might cause random bad actor X who's trying to not count the votes or something like that, not certify the votes, to think twice about the potential downside of that. Does everyone agree with that?
I agree with that. And I also agree with Ken that, I mean, due process is important. That's I mean, that's not something you jettison, my take has always been, I think I'm more with you on your debate with Josh Barrow, which is, and it's sort of you know, the dharmic approach, I think, to this, which is you do the next right thing. And you can't be attached to the outcome. You can't game out the step you're going to take, if it's the right step to take, because you think that the end result, is futile or something like that. I always said that about impeachment. Like, even if this person is not going to be convicted, there is a value to that process and to all of the symbolic things that go along with it. And I think the same is true. I don't think that this was a mistake in the end.
I don't either, and that probably in part derives from me being a criminal defense attorney and a First Amendment attorney. So I think that what I've been telling people is no one promised you that these American values were going to result in victory all the time. No one promised you the good guy's always going to win. So sometimes the outcome of respecting due process or First Amendment values is you don't like the outcome. And unfortunately, that's part of it, but it's the worst approach other than all the others. And jettisoning either vigorous First Amendment protection or due process is inevitably going to be even more abused by the people whose conduct we're worried about. And to loop back to Renato, absolutely, I think we have to go after the locals, because it's in the local arenas where people are much more vulnerable to bullying and abuse and fraud. It's less under the microscope, and we need there to be some deterrence in those venues, or else really you're just going to have a travesty.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing at least that we can be happy about, I think it's a good thing that we didn't have a big fight this year about the legitimacy of our elections in the United States. I think that was a bit of a bright spot that we can have here in an otherwise very dreary scene.
I was going to add to the holding the people accountable at the state level, to tie it back to the Supreme Court immunity argument, is that, during the oral argument, the court's answer to, okay, then how does this not put the president above the law? What if he ordered the SEAL Team 6 hypothetical? What if he orders the military to go assassinate his political opponents? And their answer was, the check is that people won't follow unlawful orders, or that people that he tells them to do illegal things won't, because they will be punished for it. And the only way that works is if they are, in fact, punished for it. And I think the state level is all the more important, because I have trouble understanding, under the Supreme Court's theory and under this idea of the unitary executive, how anyone in the executive branch could be prosecuted for following an order that by definition is an official act and constitutional under Article 2. That makes no sense to me. So in some ways, the state level might be the only buffer that we have, at least with regard to January 6th now.
Right. And not to mention the fact that it makes a big difference if the president is willing to pardon a broad range of illegal conduct in service of that president's agenda. And, the bit about, Asha, the bit you're saying, will SEAL Team 6 assassinate somebody? And the answer was no, because, they're worried about personal liability. Well, the president-elect has just nominated somebody for Secretary of Defense who convinced him to pardon people convicted of war crimes,
Correct.
and he's floated a commission that's basically going to be hand-picked retired generals that are going to identify generals who are not politically reliable and ditch them. So I'm not sure that sounds like sort of a norm-based boundary that I'm not sure we have anymore.
Yeah, I agree with that. One thing I wanted to loop back to, and I guess I thought was very interesting, is Ken, you and Asha both talked about the importance of doing having a process, even if it doesn't necessarily lead to the result you'd like. If the good guys don't win in the end, to use your phrase. One thing Asha and I discussed a bit last week is whether whether Jack Smith should be actually winding these things down, as it looks like he's doing, or whether he should go through the steps and have the new administration shut down his prosecutions. Similarly with Bragg, right? Bragg's taking a week to consider. I don't think he's taking that week because he's rushing forward to a sentencing. I suspect he's potentially reaching his own calculus there. Where do you come on that?
I'll tell you where I come out, and it's an unpopular position. I think Jack Smith backing down is mandated by who he is, and what he's doing. Jack Smith's prosecutions, his efforts stand for the proposition that the rule of law matters, that laws matter, and you have to adhere to them even if you're powerful. Department of Justice policy, for better or worse, is absolutely explicitly clear that you can't prosecute a sitting president. That makes the outcome very clear, and the only way to get around that is to have, I guess, Merrick Garland issue a new Office of Legal Counsel opinion saying the opposite and have that flipped over. But I think that would be even worse for the legitimacy of what the process was. I think doing any of that or refusing to obey the law they've said they are obeying basically becomes like, what they were prosecuting. It becomes power for the sake of power. And unfortunately, if you are an adherent of due process, sometimes due process is going to be used by bad people against you. The rule of law is perfectly susceptible of being used by the bad guys. So I don't see any other way Jack Smith could do it and retain credibility that what he was doing before was trying to hold someone to the law.
I would only disagree to say I think that he could very validly continue until January 19th or even, and make that the date that it stops because Trump isn't the president until then. And this doesn't apply. And I think he would be, just as kind of like a symbolic, I think that would still be consistent with you're not above the law.
Right.
Until that, and if there's immunity for that office or there's some policy that protects you, then let it take effect the day it takes effect. I think he's being strategic, Ken. I think by winding down now, he has time to actually write his reports. And I think if he were to wait until that time, then there would be all kinds of shenanigans and those reports would never see the light of day.
I thought that I saw your point on social media. I thought it was very perceptive. And yeah, you're going to have Merrick Garland, who's not Bill Barr, and not going to lie about the content of the report or minimize it. Is an excellent chance he'll release it. So I think, yeah, creating that historical record of what happened is important for history, even if it's sort of cold comfort.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the other thing that I would just say is kind of a context to add there is, Asha, I wonder, you're right. If he went out, he could technically go up to January 19th, but the whole purpose of those proceedings is to reach a conviction. And if you know that a conviction, like for example, there are times when I had a case where the defendant passed away. Well, if he dies, I mean, what are we doing here, right? Well, there's nothing more to do. And I think at this point, any work they did between now and January 19th would be futile because there'd be no trial before January 19th, no conviction. What would they be doing?
Renato, I had a federal judge yell at me for telling him that the defendant died when he had to dismiss. And he says, "Where's the death certificate? You're being credulous, Mr. White. I'm holding a hearing tomorrow, and I want you to go to the county recorder's office and get me the death certificate." And me, Your Honor? Yeah, you. And so I did, and then he yelled at me some more. So, yeah.
Now, fair enough. I think to tie this back to the immunity decision, though, I think it's worth emphasizing and remembering that decision came out of freaking nowhere. Like, I mean, I don't think anyone imagined that they were going to go there. Even the DC Court of Appeals, which had a conservative judge on it, and that opinion was written so well that, I mean, it seemed like they were gonna have their say in some way, obviously, because they took it and then they took so long to issue the opinion. But I don't know about you. It never, I just never imagined that they would literally place the president above the law. Like that just seems so unthinkable and out of step with our, even for a conservative majority.
I would love to say I was so perceptive that I saw it coming, but no, I was floored, and I thought it was just completely outside the whole, I mean, for want of a better term, theme of America. And just, this person is above the law, can do whatever they want when talking about someone as to whom it is clearly not a weird slippery slope scenario that they would do such things, because they did. So, it's bizarre.
Yeah, I actually was on Chris Cuomo's show on News Nation arguing against one of Trump's lawyers. And they said, and he bet me something or another that he's like, this Supreme Court is going to endorse this absolute immunity. And I'm like, there's no way. I laughed at him on the air, and I thought that was absurd, because I just thought the idea that the Supreme Court of the United States is going to say you can murder a political opponent potentially, like they're never going to endorse it. And shows what I know.
Here we are.
Yep.
Before you exit stage left, Ken, because I know you're going to exit before our next segment, I did want to give you an opportunity to talk to folks about how they can get more of you, because I think you're someone, I will tell you, being back on Blue Sky and seeing your skeets reminded me how much I missed your voice.
Same.
Well, thank you. And I miss both of you too. And I'm glad to see that you both seem to have started to have more of a presence on Blue Sky. So I'm on Blue Sky at Ken White. And Josh Barrow and I have our weekly podcast, Serious Trouble, which was largely about the cases against President Trump. Now we're looking for, again, I think we're going to be a Real Housewives litigation podcast now. And but that's weekly, and I look forward to continuing to listen to this podcast.
Yeah, now Serious Trouble could be about the legal troubles of all the people who are prosecuting Trump.
Absolutely. It sure will be.
Thanks, Ken.
Thank you.
So, Asha, I have to say that the appointments by Donald Trump so far, or rumored appointments or proposed appointments or whatever they are, basically are true to form. And I feel like it's like a play stupid games, win stupid prizes sort of thing for his electorate.
Yeah. We're in the find out phase, I guess, of like, the voters who, whatever, the swing voters or whatever, the Democrats who voted for Jill Stein or whatever, they effed around, and now we're going to find out. And we are finding out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you have Mike Huckabee as the ambassador to Israel. For all those folks who decided to vote for Jill Stein, that's what you voted for there. So, yeah.
Yeah. Or, in protest against, whatever Biden's stance in Gaza. I don't think this is going to improve that situation. No, it's not.
Mike Huckabee said Israel can annex the West Bank. So there you go, which he doesn't even call the West Bank, right? He calls it Judea and Samaria.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that I find the most interesting and most complicated is the DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, cleverly acronymed to match Dogecoin, which is one of the crypto meme coins that Elon, I think, infamously promoted. That is going to be essentially Elon and Vivek Ramaswamy outside of government. So they don't have they're not subject to ethics rules. They don't have to disclose anything. They have no conflict of interest technically, but essentially a quote unquote department, which the president cannot create without an act of Congress, outside of government, essentially licensed to just tell everybody in government what to do, it seems like.
Yeah. And I was following some of the social media posts about this, and I don't recall exactly what Elon Musk said, but it's sort of like, well, if there's not an obvious commercial use for something, it sounds like this is what he was implying if he didn't say outright. If there's not an obvious commercial use for it, it's going to get the axe. And How do you think we got the internet? Exactly.
DARPA.
How do you think that we develop um, many things that help our farmers?
What about NASA? I mean, so a lot of Musk's wealth is based on SpaceX, which received a lot of technology actually from the United States government and is carrying that forward. But NASA's mission is exploration and knowledge for its own sake. I mean,
Correct.
sending a probe to to Uranus or something doesn't itself have a commercial value to it, but it is expanding human knowledge, right?
Yeah. I assume that, PBS and NPR will probably see a chopping block. I don't, that's not a moneymaker for anybody. It's literally there, as you said, to just educate the public.
Speaking of education, no Department of Education.
No Department of Education.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so here's my question. Do rural red state areas not rely on things like free lunch programs?
Sure, but people don't think about it that way. I mean, one thing that I think, and I think it's important for everyone to grapple with is somebody I don't who I talks to Trump voters all the time, whether they're people who I am interacting with for all sorts of reasons. I think that a lot of them do not spend a lot of time with news media. Don't not spend they're getting a lot of their quote unquote news from the internet, from social media, from their friends, and they're thinking about their own personal experience in a vacuum without considering the impact that governmental programs have.
Yeah, I was thinking as I was watching all of these, appointments being floated, I wish there was a way that you could, if not mandate it, at least provide some kind of major incentive for people to work in government. And I'm really thinking any level, like local, state, federal. I think once you work as a public servant, a civil servant, and you understand, I mean, moving forward, I don't know if this will apply anymore, but until now, I think you get a real appreciation for, that these are good people who go in, keep their heads down, they do their work, they're doing it to provide a service. You can disagree with different policies and things like that, but I think you really do get an appreciation for the importance of government, the services it provides, and the people who work in these agencies and departments when you're actually on the inside.
I agree with that. And I also think that it's very helpful for people at some point in their lives, whether it's in government or in some other context, right? A non-governmental agency that's doing something, a nonprofit or something, where you're actually working to help others and having that be your focus as opposed to being completely consumed by profit. And look, there's nothing wrong with making money in and of itself. I certainly am a lawyer who's out there making money and representing clients. But I do think um, serving other people, I think, is valuable. And we had a time in this country, Asha, where we had the president of the United States introducing the Peace Corps, precisely with the idea, right, that we need to inspire a new generation of Americans to give back to others and make this a better world.
We had the Peace Corps. We had, um, legislators like J. William Fulbright create exchange programs. We had Bill Clinton create AmeriCorps. Um, I don't know. I don't even know what to say. I don't know how we've gotten here. I mean, we literally have someone who basically aggressively lobbied to have a war criminal, um, a special forces person whose team members testified against him because of the atrocities that he participated in, to have that person pardoned, and lobbied successfully, by the way, is now, as we mentioned in the earlier segment, being floated as the Secretary of Defense. And this is somebody who's a Fox News host right now.
Right. Well, I mean, even more concerning to me, and it's something that Ken mentioned in our last segment, was this sort of commission of loyal generals, maybe Michael Flynn, people
Mhm.
like that, who are going to weed out people in the military who aren't going to follow Trump's orders. I mean, that is a really scary thing. And I want to say that explicitly because, I got a lot of, like I said, I got a lot of feedback, gosh, after the last episode. It's a very unusual place for me to be where people are like, Renato, you're not cynical enough or too pie in the sky. But I think particularly there's a lot of women who told, there's women who told me, like, look, my fear is greater than your fear because of the threat to our bodily autonomy, because of how direct of an assault this was against women. This election is really scaring me. And I will say that um, I think everyone has a right to be scared about the United States military being politicized, because that is something that Trump could really use in an extrajudicial way that is outside of our ordinary legal system to totally subvert our constitutional order and our system of laws.
And our friend Ruth Ben-Ghiat, who wrote the book Strong Men, which is about dictators, was scheduled to give a talk at the U.S. Naval Academy um, earlier this fall, and she was going to talk about not our current political moment, but she was going to talk about how militaries get co-opted, have gotten co-opted under authoritarian regimes, drawing on Russia and Italy, current Russia, but also Italy and Germany during World War II. Um, she was canceled. They rescinded their invitation to her because they felt that she would be too partisan. And so the precise kind of education that these up and coming leaders need, they did not receive it.
Yeah, and really, I have paid more attention to what Ruth has had to say in the last days, and others who have talked about parallels to countries like Poland and Hungary and others, where there's been sort of a soft slide to authoritarianism. We talked last week about the frog boiling, and I had mentioned that, and you and I had a discussion back and forth about that. And those, I think, are analogous countries that are important to look at because these are very recent examples, and drawing parallels there is important. There was someone I'd spoken to the other day talking about actually having shadow legal decisions. So if the Supreme Court's going to have something that seems outside of the American tradition, having something like you mentioned a moment ago, Asha, the DC Circuit Court of Appeals opinion in the Trump immunity case, but in another circumstance, having other types of rulings and decisions that would help the public understand that it doesn't have to be the way that it's being set forth.
Yeah, that is going to become very important because you can bet that all of these are going to be presented under a veneer of legality. That's what the trend is in all of these other countries, and to co-opt especially lawyers and judges to make it look like that. And I think like maybe the potential saving grace of the complete whack jobs that are being considered for these various posts is that they'll be so ham-handed and incompetent in how they execute it that it won't pass muster even under the craziest interpretation of the law, making it harder, to implement some of these things. So let's just hope. Let's just hope that this is, you know, that they are shooting themselves in the foot.
I agree with that. And that was what I was trying to get at last time. Like, doing things and accomplishing things is hard, particularly when you're kind of a bozo, which I think some nominees or proposed nominees certainly qualify for that.
Yeah. Everybody better look up the word kakistocracy.
I know I will. So, Asha, before we go, we talked in the beginning of the episode a little bit about Blue Sky. I have to say, it is so much nostalgia for me because it makes me feel like I'm on Twitter again. And Twitter has a lot, it means a lot for me in my life because Twitter led my life down a certain path where I met
Good.
certain people, I reconnected with people like you and others, and took a direction in my life I wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah, I agree. And It did really, really change dramatically after Elon Musk bought it and dismantled it and really took away the features that made it not just helpful to me professionally, but or helpful for my personal professional trajectory, but also just helpful for me in what I do. It became harder to find information. It got flooded with all kinds of crap. The people who were able to buy blue checks and then get their things amplified and pushed to the top of your feed. It's just become a hot mess. But one of the things about social networks is your voting with your feet doesn't actually have an impact unless everybody does it. It really is. I mean, it's a very strange product in that you need a mass exodus in order for something to actually have effect.
Yeah, that's right. And I always thought, and part of the reason why I stayed on Twitter, even after I saw it lurching towards oblivion, was there's a concept called network effects. There's certain types of things that the more people have them is how valuable it is. In other words, we're on Facebook because everyone else is on Facebook or whatever. We all use Microsoft Windows and our work machines because everyone else does. And so we can exchange files or whatever, use the same applications. And that's kind of how Twitter was. It was there was a point of being there because everyone else was there. And even though it was slouching towards Gomorrah, so to speak, it was nonetheless, where everyone was. And I went to Threads for a period of time because
Yeah,
I did because my thought process was actually Zuckerberg has a built-in base of users in Instagram and he can port them over and they have a lot of money. So maybe he can find a way to move everybody over. And that was our hope. It didn't happen. And I think a lot of it is because the user experience at Threads made it feel like a text extension of Instagram rather than a duplication of what we loved about Twitter.
I agree. And I think that what your hypothesis was didn't really translate, at least from my experience. I don't think the people who follow me on Instagram, I don't really see them on Threads. I don't know that user base actually converted. And it doesn't have a lot of, one of the things about Threads, like Instagram, is that it makes it hard to post links because it's a site that doesn't want you to leave the site. Right? So this is an attention economy and they make money by keeping you on the platform as long as possible. It's like why on Instagram, I don't really post my Substack posts because it's really hard for me to post a link to it. I don't really understand how you even do it. But Blue Sky, I think, has actually stated explicitly that, they want it to be helpful for people. And so you do have links that work and that will take you off the site to go read something, which, might not be a bad thing. It might not be a bad thing to be able to take a break from your social media to actually read something in depth.
Yeah, I was skeptical about Blue Sky, and the reason I was originally skeptical is they were so underfunded that they were purposely doing an invite only model because they didn't want masses of people, they couldn't handle them. And so
Yeah.
they wanted to scale up slowly, and I'm like, a social media network scaling up slowly, that's not going to make it. That's a waste of time, and I was wrong. And because the user experience is good, it really feels like to me an enclave of people who really loved Twitter, that core crowd is what it feels like right now. Like old Twitter to me.
What are you doing with your old Twitter account? I think my plan is I'm going to delete all my tweets, but I'll leave my handle there because I don't want it to get hijacked by somebody.
I'm just gonna leave it as sort of a museum, I guess. I don't know, whatever the hell. I don't really feel like putting all the effort into nuking it. I don't know what I get out of that. I mean, I guess technically, like Elon Musk can't use those tweets, but I mean, so what? I mean, I don't know. That's sort of where I'm at right now, but I could
Do you
change
want to
my mind.
contribute any data to him at all about who liked your tweets and who commented?
I don't know.
You
I
are
feel like,
contributing to his whole project.
okay, it seems very ephemeral to me. Maybe I can be convinced otherwise. I'm just like, do I want to spend 20 minutes of my time or 30 minutes figuring this out? Probably not, but we'll see. We'll see if I can get talked into it.
Okay. Well, join us on Blue Sky, everyone.
For sure.